Hello, my name is Jordana Cipriano. I'm a student currently in psychology F111X. This is my first video project, probably of many. So without that, let's get into it. For this assignment, I was tasked with finding a psychological research article, and for such, I found this article, Nature versus Nurture, the interplay between a child's mind and environment. It was authored by Shanice Harris, and it was published on the 28th of August, 2024 by Northwestern University. For this assignment, we were tasked with finding an article that was not a scholarly article, but that being the article that I had chosen did link to the actual study that it was speaking about, which I suppose might qualify as a scholarly article. So in that case, I do apologize, but I went ahead and included the information here because I did pull from it for this project. It is depressive symptoms during the transition into adolescence, and its authors are Matias Martinez, that is the senior author, and his co-authors are Claudia M. Haas and Yang Qiu. It was published on the 3rd of September 2024 by the PNAS National Academy of Sciences. I would also like to add that the authors listed here are also students of Northwestern University, which is who published the original articles. So I'm not quite sure if there could be possible bias there, but I just figured it was worth noting. So here's a table of contents, not necessary, but I figured it might be helpful. So for this assignment, we have to cover components B through E. So component B is what kind of psychologists perform the research and what do they typically focus on? That's what I'll be covering first. Secondly, I'll be covering component C, a description of the study design, including type, research questions, data collection, participants, analysis plan, and findings. Third, I'll be going over component D, opinion on the article, critiquing research design, limitations, improvements, and relevance to psychology. And last but not least, I'll be covering component E, how the research described in the chosen article can be applied to real-world applications, or I suppose it's a bit redundant, but real-world application of the study. So focusing on component one, what kind of psychologists perform the research and what do they typically focus on? So like I said previously, the senior author is Matias Martinez. He was the first to author the SESP study, Depressive Symptoms During the Transition into Adolescence. Martinez achieved an MA in Human Development and Social Policy in 2023 from Northwestern University. Again, the author of the original article that I chose. The focus on his studies is the emotional, social, and cognitive development of adolescents as a result of school, or rather, school environments. And Claudia M. Haas and Yang Chu, there wasn't too much information, but they are also students at Northwestern University studying human development and social policy. So on to component two, a description of the study design, including type, research questions, data collection, participants, analysis plan, and findings. I might not cover these in the exact order that it was listed for the requirements, but let's just get into. First, I included a quote from the co-author Yang Qiu. Our study emphasizes the importance of paying attention to individual differences and how some people are more sensitive to social environments than others. He continued to say, we should never assume that the same environment will have the same impact for everyone. There is no one size fits all. And I sort of included that quote because I wanted it to divulge into the research question, which is, uh, does having a larger left hippocampus amplify the risk for depression in children growing up in difficult environments? And of course, this is sourced from the study itself. I know I included these hyperlinks that just say source. I apologize because I now know that that's not super useful for a video project, but I will, of course, upload the actual PowerPoint I'm using here in the final submission. The research participants, as hinted at earlier, are uh, children between the ages of 9 and 11. The same participants were followed repeatedly and observed for the course of 2 years. So the population they're observing was the same, and they were children between 9 and 11, and they were followed through the course of 2 years, respectively. Moving on to the analysis plan, again, like I said, this might not follow in the exact order provided, but I just put it in the most sensible chronological order I could think of. So the analysis plan. So the study uses several methods to analyze its findings. Two of the ones that I chose that I recognized from the lecture and the reading this week were correlation/regression analysis. testing associations between hippocampal size, environmental quality, and depression scores, and longitudinal comparisons. Sorry, I'm a bit sick. Changes over time in the same participants. And onwards to how do they collect the data? So again, the study used various means to collect said data. So they used neuroimaging or MRI scans to measure the hippocampal volume, surveys and questionnaires, both taken by oneself and caregivers. So it was reported by both the individual participants and the caregivers watching over said participants for depressive symptoms, and environmental context data. So the quality of social environments, whether they're supportive or difficult. So onwards to the study design. So I pulled this from the textbook. A longitudinal study tracks the same people over time, which this study surely does for the course of 2 years. Some longitudinal studies last a few weeks, some months, some a year or more. And this study again lasted for 2 years. Again, I know that this source is not very useful since it's a hyperlink, but again, this was taken from the textbook. So, the study that I'm focusing on is longitudinal by design, as it followed children over 2 years, measuring the changes in their brains, hippocampus size, and depressive symptoms in their environment, as listed by their surveys/questionnaires. It's also worth noting that the study was not experimental, as there was no manipulation or random assignment. Again, these individuals that were participating were the same over the course of 2 years. It's not super clear on how they chose these individuals, other than the fact that they looked for children between the ages of 9 and 11. So onwards to the study type. So I pulled this from the lecture notes on Canva. A qualitative design is a systematic but subjective approach to describe life experiences and give them meaning. Qualitative designs are in contrast to quantitative designs, which are formal, objective, systematic processes for obtaining information. The study type is quantitative by design, as it incorporates brain imaging and depression scores. Furthermore, the longitudinal design mentioned previously is a type of observational and correlational study, as said by the textbook. Thus, the study and design type is also a longitudinal correlation study. I did get this specific term from an outside source because I know that I don't believe that neither the lecture notes nor the textbook refer to a longitudinal correlation study, but longitudinal studies are correlational by design, I believe, since they, uh, use qualitative and quantitative data. So onwards to the findings. So the study found that children with a larger left hippocampus showed more depression symptoms if raised under challenging environments. It also found that in a supportive environment, a larger hippocampus did not increase depression risk. And the conclusion of the study is hippocampal size interacts with the environment, but the study cannot prove causality. As mentioned in the textbook and the lecture for this week, cause does not necessarily equal cause and effect, though I suppose you could argue that the longitudinal data strengthens evidence that it could, but it's not definitive. So onwards to component three, my opinion on the article, critiquing research design, limitations, improvements, and relevance to psychology. I made this quick little pros and cons. I don't think I went into each and every one of these just for time's sake, but I'll read over them. So the pros are the longitudinal design, operational definitions, large diverse samples, scientific thinking qualities, falsifiability, inductive reasoning, and some cons are generalizability. Oh, that's a hard word. Sorry. Generalizability. Or yeah, confounds possible quasi-experimental weakness, which is one that I did harp on later in this video. Causality issue, correlation, not experimentation, and measurement issues. So, some critiques of the research design. First and foremost, the design is longitudinal correlation, which is good for observing changes over time, but the limitations and such is you can't really prove cause and effect. You can strengthen evidence to, I guess, then try to definitively solidify cause and effect, but the research itself cannot be used to like say if you have a larger left hippocampus than XYZ. Secondly, since the study is not an experiment, there's no manipulation slash random assignment, meaning findings show associations but not causality. And thirdly, the reliance on surveys slash questionnaires for the depressive symptoms comes at the risk of participant demand or reporting bias. Of course, like For the self-assessment, these are 9 to 11-year-olds, so I mean, it is possible that there are fallacies in their responses, much like there could be fallacies in the caregiver's responses, because while they do observe them all the time, they don't necessarily know fully what's going on inside their heads and so on and so forth. So I did kind of touch on this, I guess, last slide, but limitations of the study. So firstly, you have third variables. There is research that shows that genetics, family history, and the overall school environment can explain part of the relationship. That relationship being the left hippocampus and depressive symptoms. Secondly, general. I'm going to struggle with this word. Generalizability is uncertain since the participants were a specific age group, 9 through 11, and may not represent all adolescents. So I thought it was interesting that they focused on students or children, sorry, that are between 9 and 11, because I believe that a lot of research focuses on teenagers, and focusing on adolescents that are not yet in their teenage years is quite interesting to me. I don't think I've seen too much of it, so I'm wondering if the study would be a bit different if they had used a population of teenagers for their participants instead. And third, cost and time. Longitudinal designs are resource intensive, and they limit the sample size and diversity as a trade-off for, of course, the research that they do garner from not having a larger sample size or diversity. And it also kind of limits how much they can do because they're so intensive that, budgets just don't necessarily provide enough for them to do a more extensive study. Some possible improvements. So first of all, add a quasi-experimental component. Compare naturally existing groups, so like children with supportive versus unsupportive environments. Secondly, use mixed methods. Qualitative interviews could add depth about how children experience their environments. This study really only focused on quantitative, so the actual like numeric data from neuroimaging and such, and the surveys. Sorry. It didn't really incorporate much qualitative data, which does kind of interfere with the findings. And increase sample diversity. I know on one hand, I kind of said that like the sample that they did have was like good, but at the same time, I do personally believe that if they had incorporated adolescents of various ages, not just 9 to 11, they might have had different findings, or they may have come to a different conclusion. Relevance to psychology. So first and foremost, it directly connects to developmental psychology and abnormal psychology, showing how the brain development and environment both influence mental health. Secondly, it supports the need for preventative interventions. So helping children in difficult environments could offset biological risk factors. Granted, I don't know if this is necessarily a finding of the research. I feel like that's kind of more of a I don't want to say common sense, that might be a little bit derivative, but students in difficult environments just they're already prone to many risk factors, but this kind of solidifies such, I suppose. And third, demonstrates the value of longitudinal research in psychology, even with its costs and trade-offs, because it tracks real development changes over time. So I don't mean to say that longitudinal research is bad. The struggle is it can't prove causality, but it can provide the research necessary to come to certain conclusions or possibly make certain changes regarding what the research in question was intended to do or intended to find, I suppose, or prove. And last but not least, how the research described in the chosen article can be applied to real world applications. So, first of all, early identification of at risk youth. Of course, the study shows that the hippocampal size interacts with environmental stress, which could be used to screen children who may be more vulnerable to depression. This is based on the lecture notes scientific thinking goal of prediction. And this one's kind of similar, but interventions in difficult environments. Findings from the study show that supportive environments reduce the risk of depression. So again, kind of adding on to the first one, I guess they're kind of similar. I apologize for that. But students who are in difficult environments, I feel like this study kind of solidifies that if we can be more supportive to them, even with the hippocampal findings, we can reduce the risk of their depressive symptoms. And last but not least, educational setting, which is kind of what the researchers in question focus on primarily anyways. Teachers and school psychologists can use these insights to design environments that reduce stress and increase support, of course, in a perfect world where they can do such. And that will conclude my video project one. I hope you enjoyed.